These lethal airstrikes are disrupting more than just aid supplies to Gaza. They're also causing tensions within Israel's allies. And the government has a difficult decision to make. James Landell, BBC News.
Let's get more now. We can bring in former ambassador to Malta and the president of the Middle East Policy Council, Gina Abercrombie-Winstanley. Ambassador, always great to have you here on BBC News. How serious of a warning is this, do you think, from the U.S. and from President Biden?
Well, President Biden did exactly what he needed to do. He has been saying for several weeks now, communicating to the Israeli prime minister that the United States is not satisfied with how they're conducting the war, with how they're prosecuting it, and quietly behind the scenes has been giving exactly what we needed to see from them with regard to the treatment of civilians, with regard to providing humanitarian assistance, and of course, protecting health workers, aid workers, and journalists, and without much to show for it. So at this point, the president was being increasingly embarrassed by the prime minister, which the prime minister has shown previously that he's willing to do. And it was a time to come to heel on what the U.S. president wanted from the Israeli prime minister.
You said there that the president didn't have much to show for his previous warnings. We now have these reports that in the last few hours, Israel plans to take more steps to allow aid into Gaza, opening new routes into the territory. What do you make of those announcements? Do you think it shows potentially that Israel is taking this latest warning a bit more seriously?
Absolutely. The president needed to make a credible statement to the prime minister about what would happen if he was not listened to. And it was clear, it is now clear, that the prime minister heard him. I think very important lessons are going to be taken from this from all sides. Number one, that the United States, push come to shove, the president will use the leverage that he has, that it is not acceptable to behave in ways that are counter to Western values and ideals. The law of armed conflict must be followed. Collective punishment is not acceptable, and this situation in Gaza cannot be sustained. Another lesson is going to be next time, don't wait as long to make this strong statement. I think that there will be far less room for the Israelis to work, frankly, against their own best interests. The president warned them from the beginning. Their international standing has been severely compromised, creating a humanitarian disaster, weakening the relationships that they have with nations in the region. We've seen the United Arab Emirates come out with a very strong statement saying that the diplomatic relationship is in danger. The Jordanians have made this point. The Egyptians have made this point. So there's been no gain in imposing this kind of misery on the Gazans. And of course,
well, Ambassador, what about then, sorry to interrupt, but what about the relationship then with the U.S. and Israel? Does this mark somewhat of a turning point in the relations between those two countries?
I think some lessons are going to be learned from this, that the United States cannot depend simply on asking nicely and standing by. I don't think there's going to be a drastic difference. The United States is not going to abandon Israel, but it is going to hold standards for Israel and expect Israel to meet them.
I want to ask you, we have about a minute left here, but looking ahead now, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been very insistent that he does plan to go ahead with an offensive into Rafah in the southern part of Gaza. What do you think now this all means, and this phone call between the two leaders? What does that mean for that potential offensive? Will that still go ahead?
I do not believe it will go ahead unless the United States is satisfied with the precautions and guardrails put in place to protect civilians. I didn't think it would happen before, but I believe now it will not happen. The president has made clear he's serious.
And it's interesting to hear as well, we heard in that report that other countries, including the UK, are potentially starting to re-examine weapons deliveries to Israel. Could we see some changes now from the international community?
The U.S. Congress, members of Congress are looking at it. You have people who would never have thought of questioning providing assistance to Israel 6 months ago, a year ago, saying now that it needs to be conditioned, that we have to maintain the standards that we have put in place that are in black and white, U.S. law about the conduct of those to whom we sell and give weapons. And Israel's had a pass in the past. It's going to be more difficult in the future for them to continue to get a pass on this.
Gina Abercrombie-Winstanley, former ambassador to Malta, president of the Middle East Policy Council. Thank you as always.
Thank you.
Well, returning now to that deadly airstrike on a world